There is a ribbon sewn into the lining of my dolman, along the seam at the left breast, where a man would keep a letter or a lock of hair. It is not a letter. It is a strip of cloth cut from the dress I wore the last night I was Nadejda. I do not know why I kept it. I have not opened the seam in 14 months, but I know it is there the way a man knows where his powder horn is in the dark by weight and position, without having to look. My name is Corporal Alexander Sokolov. That is the name I chose. That is the name into the muster roll of the Polish Light Horse, 1st Squadron, attached to the left wing of Bennigsen's Army of Poland. No one has asked me a different question. I came to this regiment in the autumn of 1806. I told them I was 18. I was 23. They believed me because soldiers do not look at each other the way women are looked at, catalogued and assessed, and measured against some imagined standard of correctness. Soldiers look at what a man can carry and how he holds a weapon and whether his eyes go flat when the order comes. My eyes did not go flat. I had been riding since I could sit a saddle, which in my family was before I could walk. I could shoot. I could sleep in rain. I could eat once in 2 days and complain about it without meaning the complaint. They believed me because I gave them no reason not to. The dolman is dark blue, silver braid at the chest, the collar tight enough that I have to keep my posture or it binds at the throat. I learned to love the tightness. It holds me upright in the saddle when exhaustion would have me bent forward. The regiment's horses are Polish bred, short and compact and mean-tempered in cold weather. My horse is named nothing. I have not named him. Naming a horse is something you do when you believe you will keep him. Heilsberg is a town in East Prussia on the Alle River. I did not know it before June 1807. I know it now. We had been fighting the French for 2 months, retreating and retreating again across ground that looked the same from every direction, flat and pine-forested, and crossed by rivers that were not on the maps we had been given. The army was not beaten. The army was tired in a specific way that is different from exhaustion, the way a man who has been answering the same question for too long becomes tired, not in his body, but in the part of him that still believes the answer matters. Friedland was still 3 weeks away. We did not know that yet. On the morning of 10th of June, we knew only that Bennigsen had chosen to make a stand on the right bank of the Alle, with the river at his back, and that the French were coming from the west, and that the cavalry would be needed on the left flank. I had slept 4 hours. My hands were cold. Before I left, my mother stood in the doorway of the house and did not speak. She had not spoken to me in 3 days, from the morning I told her. She did not shout. She did not forbid. She stood in the doorway and her face did what faces do when a person has already decided to stop arguing. The muscles going still, the eyes finding some point past the person they are looking at. I cut the strip of cloth from the dress that night. I did not tell her I was leaving in the morning. I left before she was awake. I do not know if she was asleep. The battle at Heilsberg began at 4 in the afternoon, not in the morning, the way battles are supposed to begin, the way every engagement I had ridden through before had begun, with the cannon starting in the grey light and the cavalry moving before the mist had lifted. This one came in the afternoon, when the light was already angled and the shadows of the pine trees lay long and specific across the ground, pointing east. The French attacked across the Spanden stream. Marshal Soult's corps, I was told afterward. In the moment, I did not know whose corps it was. I knew the sound of the guns, 12-pounders, and I knew the sound was coming from the direction of the redoubts our infantry had thrown up along the ridge, and I knew from the rhythm of the firing that the French were advancing in column and that the columns had not broken. That is what sustained cannon fire on advancing infantry sounds like when the infantry does not stop. It does not sound like victory. We were ordered forward at 5:30. The order came from Captain Rajewski, who had commanded the 1st Squadron since October, and who trusted me, I believed, with the specific quality of trust that is not friendship, but is something near it. The trust a man extends to someone who has not yet given him reason to withdraw it. He was not young. He had grey at his temples and a sabre scar along the left jaw that he had never explained, and that no one had asked about, because in this regiment, you did not ask about the thing that left a man scarred. You understood it was the thing that had also kept him alive. Mount, he said. We mounted. The squadron was 31 men. I had counted them that morning by habit, the way I had learned to count everything, since the first time a formation I thought was intact turned out to have holes in it that no one had mentioned. 31. I was the 31st. There is a specific terror in cavalry action that is different from infantry action, and I had not understood it until I experienced it, because everything I had read about war was written by men who described cavalry charges as magnificent, as the decisive stroke, as the moment the battle turned. What they do not write is the sound. The sound of 31 horses accelerating together is not a sound you hear with your ears. It is a pressure that moves up through the saddle and into the spine, and your own horse's breathing becomes something you feel in your thighs, the expansion and contraction of the animal beneath you. and the ground is coming at you faster than your mind can process it. And the smoke from the French infantry line is a wall of white-grey 50 yards ahead, and you cannot see past it. And the order was to ride through it, and so you ride through it. My sabre was out. My hand was not shaking. I had learned by then to separate what my hand was doing from what the rest of me was doing. We hit the French infantry on the left flank of Soult's advance. They were not in square. That matters. A cavalry charge against infantry in square is a death sentence. A cavalry charge against infantry in column on the flank before they have time to form is something else entirely. I do not know what it is exactly. I have not found the word for it. I know that the first man I reached was a French fusilier, tall in a blue coat, and that he turned toward me with his Charleville musket at the moment my horse passed him, and that the sabre caught him across the shoulder, and I felt the resistance in my wrist, and then he was behind me and I was past him, and the smoke was everywhere, and I could not see more than 20 yards in any direction. I did not look back. You do not look back. The wound came from a direction I did not expect. That is the thing about the gunpowder battlefield that no one who has not been on one can fully understand. The ancient battlefield was intimate. You could see the face of the man who was trying to kill you. The gunpowder battlefield is not. The ball that struck my left thigh came from my left and slightly behind, from somewhere in the smoke where a French soldier I never saw had levelled his Charleville at a cavalry figure passing 40 yards away and pulled the trigger. I felt it as impact first, not pain. Impact. The way a fist feels before the ache arrives, and then the leg went strange, not numb, but wrong. A wrongness in the way the limb was responding to instruction, and I understood what had happened before I had consciously registered the fact. My horse kept running. I held the saddle with my knees and held the sabre with my right hand, and I told myself to stay upright. The dolman collar tight at my throat, and I stayed upright. I do not know how long I rode after the wound. Long enough that we were through the French column and on the far side of the smoke before I pulled the horse up. Long enough that the squadron had begun to regroup. Rzewski was there. He looked at me the way he looked at everything, with the specific attention of a man who has learned to see past what a soldier wants him to see. He looked at the leg. "You are hit," he said. "I know," I said. "Can you ride?" I was already riding. I told him that. He looked at me for a moment longer than the question required. Then he turned back to the squadron. He counted. I counted with him. 26. 5 men gone in an action that lasted less than 10 minutes. 26 out of 31. I made it to the surgeon's station at the rear of the line before I allowed myself to look at the wound. The ball had passed through the outer muscle of the left thigh, above the knee, without striking bone. I knew this was fortunate. I also knew, sitting at the surgeon's station with my leg extended, and the blood dark and slow against the grey fabric of the breeches, that a surgeon's examination was a different kind of danger. I had thought about this before. I had a plan. The plan was to say nothing, to hold the wound closed with my own hands until the bleeding slowed, to ride back to the squadron before anyone could look at me carefully. What I had not planned for was the orderly, a young man from somewhere I never learned, who helped me down from the horse and saw the wound and called for the surgeon before I could stop him. The surgeon came. He was old and efficient and had the hands of a man who has done the same thing many thousands of times, and he looked at the wound and he looked at me and he said nothing for a moment that lasted several years. Then he dressed the wound. He asked me my name. "Corporal Alexander Sokolov," I said. He wrote it down. He did not ask another question. I have thought about this many times since. Whether he knew. Whether not asking was the same as knowing. Whether his silence was a different kind of witness, the kind that records without recording, that sees and does not write down what it sees. I do not know. He dressed the wound and I returned to the squadron. Heilsberg ended in the evening, the French having been repulsed from the redoubts at a cost of nearly 8,000 men on both sides in a single afternoon. It was not a decisive victory. It was not a defeat. It was the kind of engagement that exists in history because it happened before a more important engagement, the one that would define everything that came before it in retrospect. 3 weeks later, at Friedland, Bennigsen's army would be destroyed. But on the evening of the 10th of June, we held the position. I sat with the squadron in the last of the light, the left leg stretched in front of me, the bandage tight and already stiffening, and I counted what I knew. 26 men. 1 wound, 1 name that remained mine. Rzewski found me before dark. He sat down beside me with the particular heaviness of a man whose body has stopped arguing and started simply recording. He said, "Alexander Sokolov." I said, "Yes." He said, "You did not fall." I said, "No." He was quiet for a time. The guns were silent. The Alle River was somewhere to our right, and I could hear it, or believed I could. That low, continuous sound of moving water that is one of the few sounds on a battlefield that has nothing to do with the battle. He said, "Tomorrow we move east." I said, "I know." He said nothing else. Neither did I. That night I opened the seam. I did not know I was going to do it until I was already doing it, my fingers at the left breast of the dolman, finding the stitches by feel in the dark. The strip of cloth was there. I held it in my hand for a while. I did not look at it. The light was gone and I could not see it, only feel it. The texture of the fabric, the specific weight of something that had been pressed flat for 14 months. I thought about my mother in the doorway. I thought about whether she was still standing there in some version of that morning, frozen at the threshold the way certain moments freeze, repeating without resolution. Then I folded the cloth exactly as it had been folded and put it back in the seam. I closed the seam with 3 stitches using a needle I kept in the lining for this purpose. The dolman collar was tight at my throat. I stayed upright. My name was Alexander Sokolov. I slept.